The billionaire's daughter chose a new mother from 5 rich women. Her father couldn't believe who she picked. If you love emotional, unforgettable stories that stay with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got so many more coming your way. The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the marble floor as Isabella's small voice cut through the champagne chatter like a blade through silk. I will choose my new mother tonight. 9 years old. With golden brown hair cascading past her shoulders and emerald eyes that held too much understanding for her age, she stood at the center of the ballroom. Her white dress, worth more than most people's cars, suddenly seemed like armor against the sea of designer gowns and expectant faces. The room fell silent. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. The sound of heels clicking against marble stopped abruptly, creating a hush so complete that even the orchestra's violins seemed to hold their breath. Damien Cross felt his chest tighten. 48 years of ruthless business deals, of commanding boardrooms and conquering markets, and nothing had prepared him for this moment. His gray eyes, sharp enough to make grown men stammer, now watched his daughter with something dangerously close to panic. For 3 years since Elena's death, he had built walls around both their hearts. Walls made of private schools and expensive toys, of nannies and tutors, of everything money could buy except the one thing Isabella needed most. And now she was asking for it. In front of 300 of the city's elite. "Isabella," he whispered, but his voice carried in the crystalline silence. "Sweetheart, what are you?" "5 ladies came to meet me this week, Papa." Her voice was steady, precise, like his own when he addressed shareholders. But underneath, he heard the tremor of a child who had rehearsed these words in her mirror. "You said I could choose." The 5 women arranged themselves like pieces on a chessboard, each one a master of her domain. Each one believing tonight would crown her queen of the Cross Empire. Celeste Winters stood near the grand piano, her auburn hair catching the light like fire. At 34, she commanded red carpets and magazine covers with equal ease. Her smile was camera-ready, practiced to perfection, but her fingers drummed against her clutch with barely contained anticipation. Miranda Blackwood adjusted her pearl necklace with the precision of a surgeon. The business magnate had turned her father's small investment firm into a financial empire. Her dark eyes assessed Isabella like she was evaluating a merger, calculating, measuring, determining value. Helena Ashworth, elegant in navy silk, maintained the posture of someone who had stood beside senators and governors for 20 years. The politician's widow knew power, understood its language, spoke its currency. Her graying hair was pulled back in a chignon that suggested both authority and grace. Sabine Moreau sparkled like a constellation in her diamond-encrusted gown. The fashion designer had dressed princesses and presidents' wives. Every gesture was choreographed, every angle calculated for maximum visual impact. She viewed Isabella as her masterpiece waiting to be molded. Evelyn Sterling stood with her hands clasped, radiating the serene confidence of someone whose charity galas regularly made headlines. The philanthropist's reputation for compassion was matched only by her skill at wielding it for influence. Her smile was warm, practiced, media-perfect. Each woman held their breath, certain they had won. Each had spent the week showcasing their finest qualities, their most impressive credentials, their worthiest accomplishments. But Isabella's gaze swept past them all. Her eyes found a figure standing in the shadows near the service door. A young woman in a plain gray uniform, holding an empty silver tray against her chest like a shield. Clara Johnson, 30 years old, with warm brown skin and eyes that crinkled at the corners from years of genuine smiles. She had worked in the Cross Mansion for 2 years, invisible to most, essential to few. Clara had been backing toward the door, trying to disappear before the moment that wasn't meant for her. But Isabella's gaze held her like a spotlight. "The lady I choose," Isabella announced, her young voice carrying across the marble and mahogany, "is Clara." The silence shattered like crystal hitting stone. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Champagne glasses slipped from nerveless fingers. The 5 women stared in disbelief, their confident smiles melting like makeup under hot lights. Damien's face flushed red, then white. His powerful hands clenched at his sides as he struggled to process what his daughter had just done. In front of 300 guests. In front of the media. In front of the 5 women he had carefully selected and courted to be Isabella's new mother. Clara's tray clattered to the floor. Her hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. She shook her head, taking a step backward, overwhelmed by the weight of 300 stairs. But Isabella was already moving, her small feet carrying her across the ballroom with purpose. She walked past Celeste's frozen camera smile, past Miranda's calculating stare, past Helena's political composure, past Sabine's glittering shock, past Evelyn's charitable facade. She stopped in front of Clara and reached up to take the young woman's trembling hands. "Clara makes me feel safe," Isabella said, her voice small but unwavering. "She listens when I talk about Mama. She doesn't try to fix me or change me or make me into something I'm not." Her emerald eyes filled with tears, but her chin remained lifted. "She loves me just because I'm me." The ballroom erupted. Whispers became murmurs, became a roar of judgment and shock. Some guests pulled out phones. Others simply stared. The 5 women stood frozen in various stages of humiliation and rage. Celeste's perfect smile cracked completely. Miranda's business composure crumbled. Helena's political poise shattered. Sabine's artistic vision turned to ash. Evelyn's charitable warmth curdled into something ugly. But in the center of the storm, a billionaire's daughter held the hands of a housemaid, and for the first time in 3 years, looked truly at peace. Damien Cross, master of the universe, found himself face to face with a truth that no amount of money could buy. Love wasn't a transaction to be negotiated or a contract to be signed. It was a gift, freely given, by someone who asked for nothing in return. As Clara knelt to embrace the little girl who had just changed both their lives forever, the marble floor reflected their tears like diamonds scattered across stone. And in that moment, Damien finally understood what his daughter had been trying to tell him all along. The week before, 7 days earlier, the Cross Mansion had buzzed with preparation. Staff polished marble until it gleamed, arranged flowers worth more than most people's salaries, and prepared guest rooms fit for royalty. But in the kitchen, away from the chaos, Clara hummed softly as she prepared Isabella's afternoon snack. "Clara." Isabella's voice was small as she climbed onto the kitchen stool, her legs dangling. "Papa says 5 ladies are coming to meet me." Clara's hands stilled on the apple she was slicing. She knew what this meant. The entire staff had been briefed, warned, prepared. After 3 years of mourning, Mr. Cross had decided it was time for Isabella to have a mother figure. Someone appropriate. Someone worthy of the Cross name. "That's nice, sweetheart," Clara said carefully, resuming her cutting. "Perfect slices, just the way Isabella liked them." "I don't want a new mama," Isabella whispered. Clara's heart clenched, but she kept her voice gentle. "Why not, baby girl?" "Because what if she doesn't love me like Mama did? What if she tries to make me different?" Isabella's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "What if Papa loves her more than me?" Clara set down the knife and turned to face the little girl who had become so precious to her. "Isabella Cross, you listen to me. Your Papa loves you more than anything in this whole world. More than his business, more than his money, more than his big fancy cars." She touched Isabella's chin gently. "And you are perfect exactly as you are. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you." Isabella smiled then, the first real smile Clara had seen all week. "You really think so?" "I know so." Clara handed her an apple slice. "Now, tell me about your book report. Did you finish reading about the brave princess?" As Isabella chattered about her story, Clara listened with the kind of attention that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with love. She didn't know that in 7 days, this moment would change everything. She only knew that right now, Isabella needed someone to hear her, to see her, to simply be with her. Outside the kitchen, Damien Cross stood in the doorway he had approached to check on his daughter. He had frozen at the sound of their conversation, struck by something he couldn't quite name. Clara's voice was soft but certain, warm but strong. And Isabella's laughter. When had he last heard that sound? He backed away quietly, his mind already turning to the week ahead. The 5 women he had chosen were impressive, accomplished, worthy. Surely one of them would be perfect for Isabella. He never considered that perfection might be found in the kitchen, in apple slices and gentle words, in someone who asked for nothing but gave everything. Day 1, the actress. Isabella Cross woke that morning with a knot in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Today was the day her father had arranged for her to meet all 5 potential candidates in succession. A parade of accomplished women who each believed they could shape her into someone worthy of the Cross family name. Clara appeared at her bedside as always, carrying a breakfast tray and wearing the gentle expression that made Isabella feel safe in an increasingly uncertain world. "Big day today, baby girl," Clara said softly, setting the tray on Isabella's nightstand. "How are you feeling?" Isabella curled deeper into her blankets. "Like I'm going to disappoint everyone no matter what I choose." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her presence immediately calming. "You know what I think? I think the only person you need to worry about disappointing is yourself. Everyone else will be just fine." But as Isabella picked at her breakfast, she couldn't shake the feeling that her entire future hung in the balance of the next 12 hours. Celeste Winters arrived first, sweeping into the Cross mansion at precisely 9 a.m. like a movie premiere wrapped in a single person. Her red carpet training showed in every step as she glided through the marble foyer, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the indoor setting. "Isabella, darling," Celeste exclaimed, her arms opening wide in a gesture that looked choreographed for maximum visual impact. "Come to Celeste." Isabella approached cautiously, noting how Celeste's beauty was the kind that belonged on screens and magazine covers. Perfect, but somehow distant. "I have the most wonderful surprise," Celeste announced, kneeling down with careful attention to her cream-colored suit. "We're going to create magic together. Photos, maybe a little commercial work. You'll be absolutely divine on camera." Within minutes, Isabella found herself in the mansion's sunroom, which had been transformed into an impromptu photo studio. Lights on stands, reflective umbrellas, and a photographer who had apparently been waiting outside created a professional setup that felt oddly invasive in her own home. "Just be natural, darling," Celeste directed as the camera began clicking. "Smile like you're having the most wonderful time." But Isabella didn't feel wonderful. She felt like a doll being arranged and rearranged, her expressions critiqued and corrected until they matched some vision that existed only in Celeste's mind. "Think glamorous thoughts," Celeste coached. "Imagine you're at a premiere, all eyes on you, everyone wanting to know who you are." The idea of all eyes on her made Isabella's chest tight with anxiety, but she tried to smile as directed. Celeste posed beside her for several shots, her hand resting possessively on Isabella's shoulder as if claiming ownership. "These will be perfect for your portfolio," Celeste gushed, reviewing the images on the photographer's camera. "When we're together, you'll learn to love the spotlight. It's really quite wonderful once you embrace it." Isabella nodded politely, but something cold was settling in her stomach. To Celeste, she wasn't a daughter waiting to be loved. She was a prop in someone else's performance. Miranda Blackwood arrived at precisely 10:30, her silver Bentley pulling up with Swiss watch punctuality. She emerged from the car like she was stepping into a boardroom, sharp black suit, briefcase in hand, every strand of her dark bob in perfect place. "Isabella," Miranda announced without preamble, striding into the morning room with military precision. "We have a schedule to maintain." She had already spread papers across the breakfast table, transforming the elegant space into something that looked suspiciously like an office. A leather-bound planner lay open, revealing pages covered in neat, color-coded blocks. "This is your new schedule," Miranda declared, pushing the planner toward Isabella. "Piano lessons at 7 a.m., followed by Mandarin tutoring, mathematics enrichment, junior business seminars, leadership development workshops, and networking events appropriate for your demographic." Isabella stared at the planner where every hour was accounted for, every moment optimized. "What about playing?" Miranda's smile was sharp and efficient. "Play is fine within parameters. Chess, debate club, competitive academics." "Isabella, your father built an empire, but empires don't maintain themselves. Success requires early preparation." She pulled out a stack of biographies: Carnegie, Rockefeller, Jobs. Inspirational figures who understood that greatness demands sacrifice. The books felt heavy in Isabella's hands, weighted with expectations that seemed far too large for her 9-year-old shoulders. "We'll start with a practical demonstration," Miranda continued, checking her expensive watch. "A brief tour of my offices to show you what real power looks like." The ride to Blackwood Financial was filled with Miranda's phone calls about profit margins and market strategies. Isabella sat quietly in the back seat, watching the city blur past while Miranda discussed numbers and percentages in clipped, professional tones. At the office, Miranda paraded Isabella through gleaming corridors and breathtaking conference rooms where serious people in expensive suits moved with purposeful efficiency. "This will all be yours someday," Miranda said as they stood in her corner office on the 40th floor. Power, influence, the ability to shape markets and control outcomes. Isabella looked out at the sprawling city below, where people looked like ants from this height. She thought about Clara, somewhere in those streets, probably humming while she prepared lunch. From up here, Clara would be invisible. "Being successful means making hard choices," Miranda continued. "It means surrounding yourself with people who add value to your objectives. Weakness is a luxury you can't afford." When Isabella suggested she liked reading stories, Miranda's dismissive laugh cut through the air. "Stories won't teach you market analysis or strategic planning." Helena Ashworth arrived at noon with senatorial dignity, her navy blue Rolls-Royce gliding up the drive like a campaign vehicle. She emerged with the kind of gracious smile that had charmed voters and donors for 2 decades, her silver hair styled in a perfect chignon. "Isabella, my dear," Helena said, her voice carrying the trained warmth of someone who knew how to work a crowd. "We're going to make a difference in the world today." Within the hour, they were riding toward the Meridian Foundation, Helena coaching Isabella in what she called the art of meaningful engagement. "Remember to speak clearly and confidently," Helena instructed. "You represent hope, darling. The future. And of course, you represent the Cross family legacy." The foundation was housed in a gleaming building where Helena swept through the lobby like a queen returning to her palace. The tour that followed was a masterclass in controlled compassion. Serious people in expensive suits discussing poverty and education as if they were items on a grocery list. "This is where real change happens," Helena explained as they stood in a boardroom overlooking the city. "Not in the streets or shelters, but here, where people with resources and vision can create systematic solutions." Then came the moment Isabella had been dreading. "You're going to give a speech." The prepared remarks were full of phrases like generational responsibility and strategic giving, words that felt foreign on her tongue. When Isabella admitted she didn't understand some of the terms, Helena's patience wore thin. "Just read them as written, dear. The important thing is that you're participating in the democratic process of creating change." Standing before the Youth Advisory Board, Isabella stumbled over the unfamiliar phrases, her 9-year-old tongue tangling around syllables that felt uncomfortable and false. The silence that followed her halting delivery was deafening. "I'm sorry," Isabella said finally, setting the paper down. "I don't really know what this means." Helena's composure faltered for just a moment before the political smile reasserted itself. In the hallway afterward, her voice dropped to a firm whisper. "Isabella, what just happened was unacceptable. When you're in a position of privilege, you have responsibilities. You can't just give up when things get difficult." Sabine Moreau arrived at 2 p.m. like a vision from the pages of Vogue, her vintage Bentley convertible purring up the drive in a symphony of chrome and cream leather. She emerged as if stepping onto a runway, every movement choreographed for maximum visual impact. "Isabella, darling." Sabine's accent carried hints of her Parisian childhood. "Come to Sabine, mon petit ange." Isabella's simple white dress suddenly felt plain in the presence of such calculated glamour. Sabine swept toward her with arms outstretched, releasing a cloud of expensive perfume that smelled like roses and ambition. "The raw material is exquisite," Sabine declared after studying Isabella's face like a photographer composing a shot. "But we must do something about this presentation." The transformation began immediately. Sabine's flagship boutique became a temple to luxury, where Isabella was draped in silk and cashmere, velvet and chiffon. Each outfit was photographed while Sabine provided running commentary. "This emerald brings out your eyes, but perhaps we need something more sophisticated for someone of your status," Sabine mused, circling Isabella like a sculptor examining marble. The real shock came at the connected salon, where Isabella watched her long golden brown waves, hair her mother used to braid, fall to the floor in soft piles. The stylist worked with artistic intensity, creating a sleek, sophisticated bob that made Isabella look older and somehow less like herself. Makeup followed, subtle but transformative layers that felt like barriers between her and the world. When the photographer appeared to document the transformation, Isabella felt like a museum piece being cataloged. These will be magnificent for the fashion magazines, Sabine enthused. The world will see how true artistry can reveal hidden beauty. But as Isabella stared at the photos, she felt a strange disconnect. The girl in the images was undeniably beautiful, polished to a high gloss that caught and reflected light. But she looked untouchable, like someone who existed behind glass. "This is who you really are, ma petite," Sabine declared triumphantly. Everything else was just rough draft. Evelyn Sterling arrived at 4 p.m. like sunshine wrapped in cashmere, her hybrid sedan making its own statement of environmental consciousness and understated wealth. She emerged with a radiant smile that graced charity gala programs and humanitarian award ceremonies. Isabella. Evelyn's voice carried years of practice in making people feel important and valued. "We're going to change the world together." The Meridian Children's Hospital was their destination, where Evelyn swept through corridors with the confidence of someone whose donations had funded entire wings. The tour began with gleaming equipment and state-of-the-art facilities. "My foundation helped fund this entire section," Evelyn explained with obvious pride. "Isn't it wonderful what we can accomplish when we put our resources toward helping others?" But Isabella found herself more interested in the nurses who moved between rooms with quiet efficiency, offering comfort with gentle words and careful hands. The children's ward visit began with good intentions, but quickly devolved into a photo opportunity. Evelyn positioned Isabella for maximum visual impact in each shot, coaching her expression to show the right blend of concern and optimism. "Smile, but not too much," Evelyn directed. "We want to show that you care deeply, but that you're bringing them joy." The breaking point came in the cancer ward, where a little girl with no hair clutched a worn stuffed elephant. When Evelyn began positioning Isabella for what she clearly saw as a particularly poignant photo opportunity, the child shrank back in fear. "I don't want pictures," the little girl whispered, tears spilling down her thin cheeks. Isabella stood up immediately, moving between the child and the camera. "She doesn't want pictures. Think of how many other children we can help when people see these beautiful images," Evelyn said smoothly. "Sometimes we have to be a little uncomfortable to make a big difference." "She's scared," Isabella replied, her voice growing stronger. "She doesn't want to be in your pictures, and that should be enough." Instead of moving on to another photo opportunity, Isabella sat down beside the scared little girl and asked quietly, "What's your elephant's name?" The conversation that followed was real, two children connecting over stuffed animals and favorite stories while no cameras captured the moment. But Isabella could feel Evelyn's impatience, see her checking her phone with barely concealed frustration. By 6 p.m., Isabella sat in her father's study, physically and emotionally exhausted from a day of being evaluated, transformed, coached, and photographed. Damien Cross sat behind his mahogany desk, his expression expectant. "Well," he asked simply. Isabella looked at her hands, still perfectly manicured from Sabine's transformation, still soft from a day of being treated like precious cargo rather than a person. She thought about the morning's photo shoot where she'd felt like a prop, the business office where people became statistics, the political foundation where her stumbling speech had been met with disappointment, the salon where her childhood had been cut away with her hair, and the hospital where vulnerable children had become background elements in someone else's story of compassion. "They all want to help me become someone else," Isabella said quietly. Damien frowned. "They want to help you become the best version of yourself. These are accomplished women who could give you advantages, opportunities. But what if I don't want to be the best version they have in mind?" Isabella interrupted, her voice small but determined. "What if their best version isn't who I really am?" Her father's expression shifted, confusion replacing expectation. "Isabella, these women could open doors for you that—" "I don't want those doors," Isabella said, the words coming out in a rush. "Celeste wants me to be a performance. Miranda wants me to be a machine. Helena wants me to be a politician. Sabine wants me to be a mannequin. Evelyn wants me to be a symbol." She took a shaky breath. "None of them asked what I want to be." "And what do you want to be?" Damien asked, his voice softer now. Isabella thought about Clara's gentle hands braiding her hair before it was cut, Clara's patient listening when she struggled with homework, Clara's quiet humming that made everything feel safer. She thought about conversations over milk and cookies, about bedtime stories read in voices full of love, about being seen and valued exactly as she was. I want to be loved for who I am right now, not for who someone thinks I could become, Isabella said. I want someone who sees me as Isabella, not as a project or an opportunity or a photo shoot. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his business-minded certainty giving way to something more uncertain. The women I chose are successful, accomplished. But do they love me? Isabella asked simply. Or do they love the idea of what they could make me into? The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of a question that couldn't be answered with spreadsheets or strategic planning. I choose Clara, Isabella said finally, her voice clear and steady. I choose the person who already loves me exactly as I am. Her father's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. Clara isn't. She's not one of the candidates. She's the only one who never tried to change me, Isabella replied. She's the only one who asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I needed. She's the only one who made me feel like being Isabella was enough. Damien stared at his daughter, her sophisticated haircut from Sabine's salon, her posture still straight from Miranda's lessons, her vocabulary slightly expanded from Helena's coaching, her skin still glowing from Celeste's photo shoot preparation. Each woman had left her mark, but underneath it all, he could see the same 9-year-old girl who had lost her mother and needed someone to love her through the grief. "You're certain about this?" he asked finally. Isabella nodded, feeling more certain than she had all day. "I want Clara to stay with me, not as a nanny or a housekeeper, but as family. She's already family to me." As if summoned by the conversation, Clara appeared in the doorway with a tea service, her presence immediately filling the room with warmth and comfort. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Clara said softly. "I thought you might want some refreshment." Isabella looked from Clara to her father and back again, seeing the future she wanted with sudden clarity. Not a future of red carpets and board meetings and political speeches and magazine covers and charity galas, but a future of quiet moments and genuine love and being valued for exactly who she was. "Clara," Isabella said, her voice trembling with hope and determination, "would you like to be my family? Really and truly?" Clara's eyes filled with tears as she set down the tea service and opened her arms. Isabella ran to her, feeling finally, completely at home. Behind his desk, Damien Cross watched his daughter disappear into Clara's embrace and realized that sometimes the most important choices couldn't be made with strategic planning or competitive analysis. Sometimes love was the only logic that mattered. "Well then," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "I suppose we have some paperwork to arrange." As Clara's gentle humming filled the study and Isabella felt safe for the first time all day, she understood that she had chosen more than just a guardian. She had chosen love over achievement, authenticity over performance, being seen over being showcased. She had chosen to remain Isabella, and that was enough. The final night. The grand ballroom of the Cross Mansion had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. If fairy tales were written by people who measured magic in dollars and influence in guest lists. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables draped in silk, their surfaces gleaming with china that cost more per place setting than most families spent on groceries in a month. Roses imported from Ecuador filled silver urns, their perfume mixing with the scent of expensive perfumes and the subtle aroma of wealth that always seemed to cling to gatherings like this. 300 guests moved through the space like pieces in an elaborate dance, each one dressed to communicate their particular brand of success. Business titans in hand-tailored suits discussed market fluctuations over champagne. Society wives in couture gowns evaluated each other's jewelry with expert eyes. Politicians and their spouses worked the room with the practiced ease of people who understood that every conversation was an opportunity for advancement. At the head table, arranged like queens awaiting coronation, sat the 5 women who had spent the week competing for Isabella's affection. Each had dressed for victory, their outfits carefully chosen to communicate their unique value proposition. Celeste wore midnight blue silk that caught the light with every movement, her auburn hair styled in Hollywood waves that suggested both classic glamour and modern sophistication. She kept checking her phone discreetly, monitoring social media coverage of the evening, and occasionally touching up her lipstick with the automatic precision of someone who lived her life in front of cameras. Miranda had chosen a sharp black suit with subtle pinstripe details that communicated power without aggression. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, and her jewelry was minimal but expensive, each piece selected for its investment value as much as its aesthetic appeal. She reviewed notes on her phone, treating the evening like a board meeting where the final vote was about to be cast. Helena embodied political elegance in navy silk, her silver hair styled in a way that suggested wisdom and authority. Her pearl necklace had been a gift from a former senator's wife, and her posture communicated the confidence of someone who had stood beside power for decades. She smiled and nodded at other guests with the practiced grace of someone who never forgot that every interaction was potentially strategic. Sabine sparkled like a living piece of art in a gown that seemed to be constructed entirely of gold sequins and architectural ambition. Her platinum hair was swept up in a style that defied gravity, and her jewelry was bold enough to be seen from the back row of a theater. Every gesture was calculated for maximum visual impact, every angle chosen to catch the light most flatteringly. Evelyn had opted for understated elegance in cream-colored silk, her honey blonde hair soft around her face, and her jewelry simple but impeccable. She wore a small pin on her lapel, the symbol of her charitable foundation, and spent the cocktail hour moving gracefully between groups, greeting donors and supporters with warm professionalism. Each woman radiated confidence, certain that the week's efforts had secured Isabella's choice. Each had mentally rehearsed their gracious acceptance speech, their plans for guiding Isabella's future, their vision of the life they would create together. Damien Cross stood near the windows overlooking the mansion's gardens, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. At 48, he commanded rooms through presence rather than volume, his gray eyes taking in every detail of the evening with the calculating assessment that had built his empire. His black tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his silver-touched hair impeccably styled. But tonight there was something different about his usually unshakable composure. For the first time in years, Damien Cross wasn't entirely certain he was in control of the outcome. The week had not gone as he'd planned. Each woman he'd carefully selected had impressive credentials, undeniable accomplishments, and the kind of polish that would complement the Cross family legacy. Each offered Isabella access to different worlds of opportunity and influence. But watching his daughter interact with them had left him with an uncomfortable feeling that he couldn't quite name. Isabella had been polite, dutiful, everything he'd raised her to be in public situations. But she'd also seemed smaller somehow, more careful, as if she was performing being his daughter rather than simply being herself. The sound of the orchestra tuning their instruments drew his attention back to the present moment. Soon, Isabella would make her choice, and their lives would change forever. He had told himself this was what she needed, a mother figure who could guide her through the complexities of their world, someone who understood the expectations and opportunities that came with being a Cross. So why did he feel like he was about to lose something precious instead of gaining it? Papa. Isabella's voice was soft behind him, and he turned to find her standing in the doorway. She wore a simple white dress, not one of Sabine's elaborate creations, but the kind of classic, elegant outfit that had always been her preference. Her shortened hair had been styled simply, framing her face in a way that made her green eyes seem even larger and more serious. Isabella. His voice was gentler than he used in business meetings, warmer than he allowed himself to be in front of the staff. Are you ready, sweetheart? She nodded, but something in her expression made him kneel down to her level, bringing his eyes in line with hers. This close, he could see traces of Elena in the shape of her nose, the curve of her chin, the way she held her head when she was thinking carefully about something important. You don't have to do this if you're not ready, he said quietly, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. This is about what you want, not what anyone expects. Isabella studied his face with the intensity of someone trying to read a complicated text. What if what I want isn't what you want for me? The question hit him like a physical blow. When had his daughter learned to worry that her desires might disappoint him? When had she started to think that her worth depended on making choices that pleased others rather than choices that pleased her? Isabella, he said carefully, what I want most is for you to be happy, whatever that looks like. She searched his eyes as if looking for proof that he meant it. Finally, she nodded and took his hand. Then I'm ready, Papa. They walked into the ballroom together, father and daughter united in a moment of understanding that would soon be tested in ways neither of them expected. The guests had taken their seats, the conversations gradually quieting as Isabella and Damien made their way to the front of the room. The five women sat straighter, their faces arranged in expressions of confident expectation. Cameras flashed discreetly from the corners where photographers had been positioned to document this historic moment. Isabella took her place at the podium that had been set up near the head table, her small hands gripping the sides as she looked out at the sea of expectant faces. 300 people waited to hear her choice, each one probably certain they knew what she would decide. In the back of the room, near the service entrance, Clara stood with the other staff members who had been allowed to witness the evening's culmination. She wore her gray uniform and kept her hands folded in front of her, trying to be as invisible as possible while her heart ached with love and worry for the little girl she had come to cherish. Isabella's eyes found Clara's across the crowded room, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that steadied Isabella's nerves and reminded her of what she'd decided. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Isabella began, her voice small but clear in the acoustically perfect room. "Papa asked me to choose someone special, someone who could be like a mother to me." The five women leaned forward slightly, their smiles bright with anticipation. "This week, I met 5 amazing ladies. Each one taught me something important." Isabella's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Miss Celeste taught me that being famous can be exciting, but it's more important to be real than to be perfect for cameras. Miss Miranda taught me that being successful in business is impressive, but being successful at caring about people matters more. Mrs. Helena taught me that helping others is important, but only if you really listen to what they need. Miss Sabine taught me that being beautiful on the outside is nice, but being beautiful on the inside is what makes people want to be around you. And Miss Evelyn taught me that good intentions aren't enough if they don't make people feel actually good." A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't the simple announcement they'd expected. Damien felt his chest tighten as he realized his daughter was about to surprise everyone in the room, including him. "But there's someone else who taught me the most important lesson of all," Isabella continued, her young voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "Someone who taught me that love isn't about what someone can do for you, or how they can make you better, or what they can give you that you don't already have." Isabella's eyes found Clara again, and this time she didn't look away. "Love is about someone seeing you exactly as you are and thinking that's enough. Love is about someone listening when you're scared or sad without trying to fix you or change you. Love is about someone being there in the quiet moments when nobody else is watching, not because they have to be, but because they want to be." The silence in the ballroom was complete now, broken only by the soft sound of Isabella's voice and the barely audible whisper of expensive fabric as people shifted in their seats. "The person I choose," Isabella announced, her voice steady and sure, "is Clara." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted from the crowd, champagne glasses froze halfway to lips, and the carefully orchestrated elegance of the evening shattered like crystal hitting marble. At the head table, 5 faces registered shock in different ways. Celeste's camera-ready smile cracked completely, revealing something raw and wounded underneath. Miranda's business composure crumbled as she struggled to process a decision that defied every strategic calculation she'd made. Helena's political poise shattered, her face flushing with the kind of public humiliation she'd spent decades learning to avoid. Sabine's artistic vision turned to ash, her sequin gown suddenly feeling like costume jewelry at a real diamond exhibit. Evelyn's charitable warmth curdled into something bitter and confused, her foundation pin catching the light like a small, meaningless star. But Isabella wasn't looking at any of them. She had turned toward the back of the room, where Clara stood frozen among the other staff members, her dark eyes wide with disbelief and terror. "Clara," Isabella called across the crowded ballroom, her young voice cutting through the shocked murmurs like a blade through silk. "Clara, come here, please." Clara's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks as she shook her head. The silver tray she'd been holding clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the marble space like a gunshot. She took a step backward, overwhelmed by the weight of 300 stairs, by the impossibility of what was happening. "I can't," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Isabella, "Baby girl, I can't." But Isabella was already moving. She stepped down from the podium and began walking across the ballroom, her white dress flowing around her like a small, determined angel navigating through a sea of shocked expressions and expensive confusion. The crowd parted before her, conversations dying mid-sentence as she passed. Isabella walked past tables full of the city's elite, past business titans and society queens, past politicians and power brokers, her eyes never leaving Clara's face. She walked past Celeste, whose perfect composure had dissolved into something that looked dangerously close to tears. Past Miranda, who was staring at her phone as if the numbers there might somehow explain what had just happened. Past Helena, whose political instincts were warring with her personal humiliation. Past Sabine, whose artistic sensibilities were struggling to process a narrative that didn't follow any of the scripts she'd written. Past Evelyn, whose charitable smile had been replaced by something that looked like genuine confusion about her own motivations. She walked past her father, who stood frozen between pride and panic, his gray eyes following her progress across the room with something that might have been wonder or might have been terror. And finally, she stopped in front of Clara, who was trembling like a leaf in a storm, surrounded by the kind of attention she'd spent her entire life trying to avoid. "Isabella," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "Sweetheart, I'm just the help. I don't belong here. These people, your papa, they'll never. You belong wherever I am," Isabella said firmly, reaching up to take Clara's trembling hands in her small, steady ones. "You belong because you love me, and I love you, and that's all that matters." The silence in the ballroom was so complete that every word carried to the furthest corners. Isabella's declaration hung in the air like a challenge, like a truth so simple and profound that it left the assembled wealth and power of the city with nothing to say. Clara knelt down so she was at Isabella's eye level, tears streaming freely down her face. "Baby girl, do you understand what you're doing? What this means?" Isabella's green eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "It means I chose love instead of everything else. It means I chose someone who sees me as Isabella instead of someone who sees me as a cross. It means I chose someone who asks what I want instead of deciding what's best for me." She reached up to touch Clara's face gently, the same gesture Clara had used to comfort her countless times. "It means I chose the person who makes me feel safe when I'm scared, who listens to my stories about Mama without trying to replace her, who loves me just because I'm me." Clara's composure broke completely. She pulled Isabella into her arms, holding her close while sobs shook her shoulders. "Oh, sweetheart. Oh, my brave, beautiful girl." Around them, the ballroom erupted into chaos. Conversations exploded in whispered scandals and shocked speculation. Phones appeared as guests began documenting what would surely be the social story of the decade. The 5 rejected women sat in various states of humiliation and disbelief, their carefully laid plans crumbling around them like sandcastles at high tide. But at the center of the storm, a 9-year-old girl held a woman who had loved her without agenda, without ambition, without anything but the simple desire to see a motherless child feel cherished and safe. Damien Cross stood frozen, watching his daughter embrace the woman she'd chosen over fortune and status and strategic advantage. His mind was reeling, calculating the social implications, the business ramifications, the way this moment would reshape everything he'd built and planned and expected. But his heart that had been locked away since Elena's death 3 years ago, was breaking open like a dam in spring flood. Because as he watched Isabella's face pressed against Clara's shoulder, as he saw the peace and joy and absolute certainty in his daughter's expression, he realized something that no amount of money or power could have taught him. His daughter hadn't chosen poorly. She had chosen perfectly. She had chosen love in its purest form. Love that asked for nothing and gave everything. Love that saw worth where others saw only service. Love that valued presence over presence and heart over status. She had chosen what he had been too afraid, too proud, too damaged to choose for himself. The ballroom's chaos swirled around them like a storm, but at its center stood a truth so simple and profound that it rendered all the wealth and influence in the room meaningless. Sometimes the most powerful choice is the choice to love without condition. Sometimes the greatest treasure is the one that can't be bought. Sometimes a child's wisdom surpasses every adult calculation. And sometimes, in a world obsessed with having more, the most revolutionary act is choosing to be grateful for what you already have been given. As Clara held Isabella close, as Damien watched his daughter's face glow with happiness he hadn't seen since before her mother died, as 300 guests struggled to process what they'd just witnessed, the crystal chandelier continued to cast its fractured light across the marble floor. But now those fragments of light looked less like broken pieces and more like stars, countless and brilliant and impossible to count, illuminating a moment that would be remembered long after all the expensive dresses were returned to their closets and all the strategic advantages had been forgotten. Isabella Cross had chosen her mother, and in doing so, she had chosen to transform not just her own life, but everyone who witnessed the radical power of love freely given and gratefully received. The little girl who had been asked to choose from among the impressive and accomplished and suitable had instead chosen the woman who had never asked to be chosen, who had only asked to love and be allowed to serve that love without expectation of reward. In that choice lay a truth that would echo far beyond the marble halls of the Cross Mansion. The most valuable things in life are not the ones we can afford. They are the ones we are blessed enough to receive. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.